work session on July 15th, 2025. I will now ask our clerk, Georgia, to call roll for attendance.
Counselor Nolan,
Present. Good morning.
Counselor Rosenthal,
Present.
Counselor Wong,
Present.
Counselor Lewis,
Present.
Council President Peterson and Counselor Gonzalez are excused, and Deputy Council President Simpson.
Present. Thank you. Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor. Exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
Great. Counselors, we have one work session topic today. We're joined by our staff representing Metro's visitors venues, including Portland's 5 Centers for Performing Arts. Metro, as the operator of P5, has collaborated with the City of Portland, the owner of the P5 building, over several months to discuss maintenance, operations, and long-term management of the venue. We will hear an update on those recommendations today, and we're joined today by Craig Stroud, General Manager of Visitor Venues, and Rachel Limbo, Interim Executive Director of P5. Thank you.
Well, good morning, counselors. Craig Stroud, General Manager of Visitor Venues, joined by Rachel Lembo, Interim Executive Director for Portland 5. We also have Commissioner Chris Oxley in the audience. He participated in the work group the last 5 or 6 months and is available for questions if you have them and want to speak directly with him. Today's presentation will be presented by Rachel Lembo. She has been part of the work group and was very instrumental in ensuring clear communication and background information was provided to the work group participants, as well as to help fashion and craft the final deliverables that you received a couple of weeks ago. So with that, we'll run through the recommendations in the presentation today, and then we'd be happy to answer questions and take direction from you. Rachel?
Thanks, Craig. Good morning, Deputy Council President and members of Metro Council. As Craig said, my name is Rachel Lembo, she, her pronouns, Interim Executive Director for Portland 5 Centers for the Arts. We're going to start off today with a little bit of background on this process, then discuss the work group and what they discussed. We'll go over the work group recommendations, and then we will look for your direction on how to proceed. Next slide. In August of 2022, the Metro Internal Auditor's Office released a report on P5 management, the P5 management IGA between the City of Portland and Metro. This report found issues, including governance structures that were difficult to navigate, a need for shared understanding regarding the physical condition and maintenance of the P5 theaters, as well as an absence of a clear funding plan for maintenance, support for arts organizations, and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. The auditor's report highlighted challenges P5 had been facing for years, and it came at a time when P5 had just begun to reopen and recover from the pandemic closure. Over the next 2 years, P5's number of events and audiences grew, but didn't fully recover to pre-pandemic levels. This, along with increasing costs such as inflation, wage pressure, and building maintenance, resulted in an unbalanced and unsustainable budget. We are currently projecting a $500,000 operating deficit for last fiscal year, and even that included rate increases that we heard were unmanageable for local arts groups, who are also struggling to bring audiences back and facing rising costs. As you know, we were able to balance our budget for this current fiscal year, but only with the elimination of 12 positions, 17% of our full-time staff. Next slide, please. That brings us to October 2024, when Metro Council and the Portland City Council directed staff to form a performing arts venue work group to evaluate operations, maintenance, and long-term planning of the P5 venues. The work group was asked to examine operational challenges and opportunities with a focus on aligning management and operations with regional economic and cultural goals, and to explore alternative operating models. Next slide. The work group included 19 members, as you see here, who were selected by an open application process. They met 10 times starting in January of this year. The first 3 meetings were focused on learning about the other members and broadening their understanding of the stakeholders and perspectives that are key to this discussion. Members shared their visions, wants, and needs for the venues, generating a long and creative list of ideas. And they dove deep into the details of the current model's finances and operations, demystifying practices and discussing current challenges. Next, they moved into discussion of alternative operating models. The group heard from a performing arts expert about national trends, where funding comes from, how capital is funded, and discussed pros and cons of various operating model scenarios. Finally, they discussed their recommendations. Some had specific thoughts about which operating models would work best. Others flagged key questions that still needed to be answered or areas that warranted more exploration. There wasn't an expectation of consensus, and they didn't come to one. However, there were clear through lines in the work group's discussions, which drove the recommendations. Next slide, please. We'll start with the short-term recommendations. The work group identified the following actions that can be made within the current operating model. Increase revenues by expanding efforts to maximize venue usage, such as additional bookings so there are fewer dark days, and invigorating food and beverage options. Improve relations with local arts organizations through more frequent engagement, including feedback on operations, support, and coordination, and committing to actionable solutions. And improve booking policies by ensuring they are transparent and options are understood by clients. We are already discussing these recommendations at P5, and this summer we'll be putting together a plan for implementation. Next slide. Capital planning and funding was one area that had consensus from the group. They agreed that the backlog of deferred maintenance and necessary building modernizations impedes P5's ability to operate effectively and efficiently. They recommend that capital is not funded by operations, as is the current practice. Currently, capital projects are primarily funded by operating surpluses from previous years, a method which is especially challenging now when net operations are low or even negative. The work group called for a separate funding stream to be identified to avoid pressure to increase rates in order to fund capital projects. Complete facility condition assessments to determine which projects should be prioritized and the estimated cost. Our operations team is already working with the Capital Asset Management Department on this. Finally, the work group recommends that this work begin immediately. It should not wait for other questions around venue management to be resolved. Next slide. The work group recommends that the City of Portland be the entity responsible for continuing this work, leading the future investigation, analysis, and public engagement. The current 2-government model, with the city owning the theaters and Metro managing them, is not recommended by the work group. The work group recommends that the city and Metro begin preparing a plan for dissolution of the IGA while the city works with stakeholders to continue assessing options to identify a new long-term operating model. Next slide. Moving on to the long-term recommendations. Given the complexity of factors that influence the success of operating models and the limited time the work group had, they felt more analysis and consideration were needed to determine the best operating model for Portland 5. The report includes the operating model scenarios the work group discussed and would consider for further investigation. This includes management by a nonprofit, for-profit, university, or city, as well as separating the venues under different management. All scenarios assume continued city ownership of the venues. Next slide. The work group identified several areas of tension that require careful consideration and balance, including continued co-management or separation of the venues. Some work group members foresee potential improvements by separating the venues, including innovation, nimbler operations, and streamlined decision-making, while others expect increased costs as well as losses in living wage jobs, efficiencies of scale, and calendar coordination. Expansion of philanthropy. While all work group members concur that philanthropic investment is crucial to a healthy performing arts ecosystem, some work group members believe Portland 5 needs to dramatically expand contributed revenue beyond government support, while others worried that that could divert a significant portion of the region's arts funding capacity to the detriment of other arts organizations. Cost pressures. The work group recognizes that pressure to increase fees and revenues for operational sustainability might have adverse impacts on nonprofit and commercial users of the facilities. Further exploration of new revenue streams and/or different business models is therefore warranted. Next slide. The report also includes a values statement and guiding principles, which can be used to drive additional analysis. The guiding principles recognize the importance of Portland 5 in the arts and culture ecosystem, and that arts and culture are moral imperatives for a healthy society, vital to the well-being of Oregonians, and serve as galvanizing forces for connection, creativity, and civic identity. Portland 5 creates public value by providing access to the performing arts that are relevant and responsive to the community. The capacity of the venues must be balanced with a financial and operational model that ensures resiliency, transparency, and a community focus. Finally, P5 venues function as a generative force for support within the community through partnerships, community relationships, and engagement. Next slide. We're here today to answer your questions and hear discussion on these work group recommendations and to receive your direction on the specific recommendation to dissolve the IGA and create a transition plan to move Portland 5 operations from Metro back to the city of Portland. Next slide. Possible next steps include coordination with the city on a mutually agreeable plan, including a timeline and date to transition operations, unilateral termination of the agreement. If Metro chooses to unilaterally terminate, we must give the city 18 months notice. Open negotiations on a new or amended agreement with the city, conduct further analysis, or take no action at this time. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. So you move it, Councilor Rosenthal, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. You've covered a lot in that, and there's been a lot of discussions going on. I'm not an expert in performance management. I have two questions. One of the questions, initial questions was, there was a recommendation to better coordination with the region, with the local and regional arts communities. And it seems like we've been doing a fairly good job of that within the constraints that we had in terms of budgets and things like that. I mean, the pandemic obviously made that very difficult. So I'm a little surprised about that. And then the other question I have is, did they consider two things? One, the regional nature of arts. There's a lot of arts things that have to do that support the P5, for example, the chamber music. People go to chamber music, they go to the concerts downtown. These are all supportive, and they do that throughout the region, whether it's a Call Auditorium or so forth. And we have the Reeser, which is a new facility. Did they consider the regionality of performance of the arts culture? And how that could be affected. And then was there any consideration of adding some of the venues back into it and making it a joint, for example, the Memorial Coliseum? So those are the questions I have initially.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. It's a number of questions. I will try to make sure. I think I heard 3 of them, so I'm going to count on my fingers, make sure I answer them all. In regards to local arts groups wanting more engagement and coordination with P5, I think if you look at the past 5 years, it's been extremely stressful for arts organizations and for venue management with the pandemic, recovery from that, changes in costs, and then P5 has had significant changes in leadership. And so I think those relationships have been stressed over that time period. We also did a pretty significant rental rate change for our resident companies during that period. And so I do think, remember, you saw the members of the work group. There certainly are some local arts groups who were represented there. And I think that comment reflects the stress that they've felt in these recent years. And that stress is environmental in this performing arts ecosystem. It doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, mean that Metro didn't manage it well. It's just been very stressful. And that means that we need to actually take some steps to help rebuild those relationships. It's a lot on me as a new executive director for P5 to make sure that I'm engaging with them and that I'm bringing them together and listening to them and making sure that our management choices have input from those groups as we're moving forward. So I actually see that in a really positive way. It's a like, let's bring us together more as we move through this. I believe your second question was about regionality and whether the work group had considered that. Their scope was actually pretty focused. So I would say no, they did not consider regionality. They were really only considering these 5 venues. And then everybody who uses those venues, be they arts groups, commercial groups, patrons, staff. But we only met for 10 meetings. There was already a lot to discuss. And so it was very focused on just these 5 venues. And then your third question.
Expansion of
Bringing the
adding back
Memorial
some of the
Compost
facilities
Market.
that have been separated out.
Yep, sort of similar to answer the second one. Like, no, it was really just focused on
Just the
these
big-
5. There was, consideration of economic impact and like, how do we help bring people back downtown? But again, it was really utilizing these 5 venues, not considering expansion of that portfolio.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. This was a large scope of work to bring everybody together to look at the history of how we've gotten here. Yes, the past 5 years have had their twists and turns. But the work done 30, 40 years ago, building a new building, coming into a new ownership model, all of those pieces of history still play out in the venues each day. I am looking at the policy question that's being asked of us is, do we as council agree with the conclusion of the work group? And in one way, I'm a yes, and in one way, I'm a no. The way that I'm a yes is that what is in the IGA is not working. Our current co-management doesn't work. And then the second piece is, do I think giving them back to the city of Portland is a good idea? And my answer to that is no, not right now. So I'm happy that we're at the point where we're waving the flag, but I will be looking to the city of Portland, one, in their leadership to dig in to start to understand these challenges. And for the city of Portland to actually have a plan in place that shows that they are able to manage all of the venues and for the community, not just for visiting artists. We really look to these spaces as pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And the ecosystem needs the small theaters as much as it needs the large theaters. And I'm very worried about the small theaters because they don't have as vocal as advocates in the community. So in order to gain my trust, the city of Portland's plan in the end of this transition, they will need to show that they are ready to take care of the small theaters as much as the large. But I really appreciate the work that's gone into proving that there is no way to kind of reorganize the deck chairs with this IGA. We've got to do something different.
Counselor Wong.
Great, thank you, Deputy President, and thank you for all the work. I think those are all extremely thoughtful process, and I generally agree with the recommendations. I'm wondering, like, I think I read that the legislature allocated $155 million to a new performance venue at PSU and potentially some funding to the Keller. And that was, from maybe 2 weeks ago. So this process unfolded before that kind of allocation and commitment from the state. So I'm wondering what that means now and how, I know you were focused on these 5 venues, but like, what does that conversation mean for the future if, there's a new potential replacement venue that received a chunk of money, probably not all the money they need, but a good start. We have new music venues kind of opening up run. So it just seems like a really dynamic landscape. And I'm wondering how the committee thought about the shifting landscape, like month by month.
I think you're totally correct, Councillor Wong, that it is a dynamic and shifting landscape, and that's important to recognize. The work group while they did sometimes want to talk about the Keller and will there be 2 new Broadway capable theaters, the one at the PSU property renovation of the Keller. Whenever the conversation sort of started to move that way, Charity Montez, who is the director of the Office of Arts and Culture at the City of Portland, she and I were the facilitators, or the hosts, I will say, we had a hired facilitator as well, would try to bring them back into the scope of these 5 venues. But it's very natural because the question of what are we doing with the current Keller is so intrinsically linked to this venue management discussion. I do want to clarify the funding that PSU got from the state. So PSU has proposed a performing arts center complex, if you will, that includes a Broadway capable theater that would be owned by the city. The current cost estimates for that are $360 million, and none of the state funding goes toward that building. It also includes a 1,200 seat academic theater. Some of the state funding goes there. It includes a parking garage. Some of the state funding goes there. Both of those will be owned by PSU, which is why PSU was able to get this funding through GEO bonds through the state, as well as a hotel. So there's a big idea for this new performing arts center complex that is now partially funded. But there is still a lot of question of where would the city find the funding for the Broadway capable theater that is a piece of that vision. And I think, you raised there's 2 new venues opening on the east side. I'm planning after this meeting to drive by Lloyd Center because I hear it's like coming down, that it's like you can see it happening. I haven't seen it yet. But there will be new live music venue going in at Lloyd Center. There's another one planned for Central East Side. These will definitely change the performing arts scene in the city. Those discussions happened some at the work group, and I think this is a place where there's another bit of a tension, where there's some people who feel like we haven't added a new large theater in this area in decades, and we've grown in population. We continue to grow, as you all know well. So the demand is there. We just need the space, and people will come back out and they will want to go see these performances. And then there's people on the other side of that who are like, but what if that demand isn't there? How is that going to impact the theaters that we already have? Are we going to have more dark days? Are we going to be having to lower our rates and fighting for performances to artists to come to our particular venues? I think there's a lot of unknown there. To help answer some of that, the City of Portland is working on a market feasibility study, which will look at all the existing venues and the incoming venues and potentially 2 Broadway capable theaters, and try to determine, is there truly market demand for that? Can we sustain that as a region, or would that grow us too far, too fast? And I believe that study is expected by the end of the calendar year.
Well, I think my general sense is maybe on the latter of your point, because we have I think consumers go out for entertainment, but we're adding a WNBA team and maybe baseball. So I think there's only so many nights a family can go out, right? So I think, to me, given all the uncertainty, a clean exit from management makes the most sense to me. And I think I've said that before, but yeah, excited to see how this process plays out. Thank you.
Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Much of what I would have asked has already been raised. I'll repeat it. I understand why you tried to keep the work group's thoughts focused. But in reality, those 5 venues don't exist on their own. And I'm wondering if we ought to continue. I'm supportive of continuing conversations about the IGA we have, because I agree with Councilor Lewis that it's not working. It's not sustainable from Metro's point of view. And I'm concerned with the reality that we've experienced, that the City of Portland has not just deferred maintenance, but transferred maintenance responsibilities to us by its inaction. So I have some questions about its capacity to raise $300 million to build a Broadway capable facility and operate or renovate and then operate another Broadway capable auditorium. Have you yourselves, with the work group or on your own, given thought to or had conversations about a truly regional plan for this? Understand the immediacy of the IGA. But we're a metropolitan area. And I can imagine that there's a role for Metro in performing arts. I'm just not sure being the maintenance or facilities management is the role that we would excel at best. So have you thought about kind of starting over in a process that would probably take 3 to 5 years to implement, to get some synergy around the region so that we can meet what should be an expanding market, but in a way that doesn't have the Keller competing with PSU and doesn't have the other venues that need renovations competing with the Reeser and other places. How do we do this collaboratively?
Wanna go?
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic question, Councilor Nolan. I think the challenges that we face in the moment is that the system is out of equilibrium. And so there's pressures coming into the system from various areas. And so what happens is that because the assets have been deferred out and they require investment in order to just keep the doors open and keep the audience in a comfortable and safe situation, we have to fund that from one area or another. There's no general fund money from Metro going into the theater. So it's visitor facilities, visitor taxes on hospitality, and then it's earned revenue for the most part. And so, and it's earned revenue is, you know, what we charge the resident companies, what we charge the other theaters, what we charge in ticket prices. It all matriculates through to the consumer ultimately. So we're out of balance there. When I look at the contract, which is what the IGA is, we're really a management company. That's our role. It's no different than, you know, if we brought a management company into the Oregon Convention Center that's, you know, headquartered out of state, like that's our role. We don't have a unique value proposition in resource provision, some level of policy development. Obviously, the greatest value is we have elected leadership regionally that can advocate and support initiatives. But at the end of the day, we're in a contract where we're an operator. And so we don't have tremendous power or leverage in that condition. And so what I think the value of the work group in this unfortunate, challenging period of time is that it's brought these questions to a point where we have about 2 years of runway of fund balance where we can operate and keep the venues moving. We get beyond that window of time, and there's going to need to be outside funding coming into those theaters, both for operations and for addressing maintenance issues. And while we're a regional government, that's not been our role historically with these venues. And so I think the question around regionalism, I don't think this action precludes a regional question and initiative. Perhaps this would generate consensus in the region from leadership to engage in these types of long-term questions, and perhaps the model does evolve. My recommendation at the moment, though, is the timelines would not match. Those questions would take longer than we have in this moment to address the financial conditions that we face. The only other thing I could add from my perspective that I thought was enlightening was attending the renovation or new construction of the Keller at the city, going down to the city council meetings, seeing the stakeholders in the room that were present and seeing the city as the primary government responsible for those theaters That's who they view. They view the city. They show up at the city. We don't see that same relationship with the Metro Council because we're the operator. We're not the owner, and we don't have the ultimate responsibility. So this is weird tension there. So that's a bit of background and perspective from me. You may or may not disagree with all of that, but I do believe that the best course of action is to call the question with the city, move them back to city ownership and management, while the regional question can play out over the course of time.
That is really helpful insight, not having sat in those rooms, and your simple observation that advocates are going where they think the decisions lie, and that's not here. I'm inclined to, I'm strongly inclined to support your proposal with an expectation that we take some leadership in initiating regional conversations and lean on the city as the potential owner of, the current owner of P5 and the potential owner of another venue at PSU as pivotal to convening that regional conversation. I think that the work group and your team has done a fabulous analysis of this. I appreciate the additional nuances you've shared today. And I think we can't afford to wait.
If I could add to that observation that Craig made, that the community does show up and treat the city of Portland as the owner, as the authority on these buildings. If you look at the track record of investment, the city's actions don't match that status. And so I think calling the question is the thing that will help us get those things aligned.
Exactly.
Any more, Counselor? You good? Okay, Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. This is making me, or this train of conversation is making me think back to the cultural needs assessment that City of Portland led and we were part of just 2 years ago. And I think in that space, we did kind of that greenfield thinking, and all of this is a revenue question, right? Like, it's not who's best at it, who's logical. It's who might be able to scrounge together half a penny from the couch cushions to duct tape this thing together. And thinking back to what we really need is we need some leadership on how arts and culture are not always at the bottom of the barrel. And even through this transition, this IGA breakup point, I do think that Metro has a role to play in taking over that role of where do arts and culture get their funding in this region? Because what came out of that report is it's on a shelf, it's not actionable, despite some really good intentions of members of that group to keep meeting. What's come out of the conversations around RAC is there weren't a whole lot of other better options. And frankly, now RAC isn't being funded at the regional level anymore. So I would like for us to recommit to the revenue side of arts and culture, even as we see this path for the venues. And I don't know if we have any status updates on that arts and culture assessment, or if I'm correct in saying it's on a shelf. Might be buried in a filing cabinet, not even on the shelf.
I have no updates. That would be my assumption.
Okay, well, I've heard council speak about a few things. I jotted a couple of things down, but Counselor.
Go ahead. You're in the middle of a thought.
First of all, I want to thank you, Rachel, and you, Craig, for time, effort. It's what y'all put into this. I'm pretty sure it was mind-numbing and mind-racking in a lot of ways. I do want to thank every work group member that put thought into this decision. I hear the financial concerns. I hear where we are, the reality. And at this point, yes, I believe we should dissolve this IGA. But I think we need to have clear goals and timelines and ramp down with that. But I'm also hearing council say like we still need to make some commitment to arts in the region. But I'm also hearing like this other, there's larger conversations that need to happen. And so I think that's part of the analysis piece that we need to provide in the background as this IGA is being dissolved, as we think about arts for the coming years. You know, we have to move forward with this because I think the financial forecast it doesn't allow us to kind of like sit on our hands on this. So we gotta just call it balls and strikes. With that, Councilor Rosenthal.
Thanks. I'll just add first of all, thank you for your analysis and all the work you've done. I think you've summarized it very well. And it puts us in a hard spot. I agree with Councilor Lewis. I don't think the IGA is working, and I think we have to give notice that we need to be out of that. I also agree with Councilor Nolan that I'm a bit concerned that the city of Portland hasn't shown in the past the kind of perspective necessary to move forward with the truly regional concept. We have a new council, we have a new structure. I'm hopeful that is going forward. I also think that it is true that we will continue to have a role, and we should continue to have a role both in the regionalism as well as in what's going on. The zoo and the convention center are part of the draws that brings people into the area, the expo center as well. So I think larger discussions are going to be necessary over the next 18 months. And I don't think it's going to be easy, but hopefully we can come up with something that provides for support for all the arts, the small arts, the big arts, and the associated arts. Anyway, that's my view.
All right. Any other, Councilor Wong?
Thank you. Can you maybe outline the work plan for the next 6 months? Like hearing today's feedback, like what happens now?
Sure. I think based on what I've heard from you all today, it seems like everybody feels sort of in line with like something needs to change. And I'll say that we sort of have two ways. If we're looking to dissolve the IGA, there's two ways to do it. We can do it collaboratively with the city, or we can do it unilaterally. The collaborative version doesn't have a set timeline. We would work with the city and we would come up with a timeline that we think makes most sense. If we do it unilaterally, we have an 18-month termination notice. So I think what I'm hearing from you is that we start with doing it collaboratively, and we work with the city and we see, are they ready for this? How involved are they in this? Like, can we come up with a timeline that we think really makes the most sense so that clients and events are supported? We're going to stay open this entire time. We want as little impact to patrons and artists as possible. We also want security for staff. This would be a massive transition for staff. We want to make sure that there's time that all of their questions get answered and it feels very smooth for them. I think in the next 6 months, as we are having those conversations with the city, if we feel any hesitancy or pushback from the city, that's when we come back to council and we look again at that unilateral action. Because I think we don't want to take that off the table, but it seems to me like we can have a more intentional, smooth transition if we're doing it in collaboration with the city.
Councilor Nolan.
Recognizing that I'm risking verging into detail that I shouldn't. Looking at the COO here. We can, in a friendly manner, issue notice of intent. And maybe even give 18 months notice and say, but let's say to the city, let's use that time to do this in the best interest of the community, the employees. Because if we try for 6 months and then it isn't going anywhere, then we've lost 6 months of movement. It's a possibility. I am not suggesting that this council make the decision of the tactic, but just it's easier to back off on hard position than it is to establish a hard position after you started with a softer one.
Heard, Councilor Nolan. And I think, right now, conversations that I've had with, city manager Jordan, we are fortunate that he used to be in this position. He's familiar with P5. He understands the challenges. He also understands the city's financial challenges. And so I do think we have an opportunity to collaboratively set a timeline. What we can commit to is as we get into those conversations, if it's starting to feel slippery, that we come back and just say, okay, no, it's time. But I'm feeling very hopeful that between this work group, between Jordan's position, and kind of everybody recognizing that this isn't working, that we can approach this collaboratively. And I can also commit that, Metro is not going to be steamrolled in this conversation, that we.
Oh, I have no doubt about that.
Excellent. We have clarity, we have experience, and we also have, as Craig mentioned, that 2-year runway. That is real. That is a hard stop. So there's not much difference between that 18 months and 2 years. This has to be resolved.
Can I add one more thing? Last week, the City Arts and Economy Committee met and they had a similar update presentation from Director Montez. And I think it's not the whole council. I believe it's 5 council members. But I definitely heard interest from those council members on making this change and bringing that back into the city. And there's excitement about that ownership, and they asked a lot of questions. So I completely agree with COO Madrigal that it feels like things are aligning, that this is going to happen. That said, we're not going to take our eyes off the road, and we're going to make sure that we keep it forward.
Sure, thank you so much. While we are getting a little bit tactical, I have 2 things to offer. First, thanks for bringing up the Arts and Economy Committee. I do know that there are several, both on that committee and on council, who have deeper history, whereas everybody else is new to these issues and challenges. And I might suggest that we equip ourselves with a plan and some council office support so that we're having our council to council conversations at the political level and not all knocking on the same 3 doors, but instead know that there are 12 or 13 doors that we should all be sharing a plan to knock on. So that's my first request for council office support, and I'm happy to help draft that strategy. And the second is, Rachel, you are showing up in a really good way in your new position. You are a longtime trusted financial analyst for our agency. So you know what it's like to work at Metro. We generally do right by our employees. As a former City of Portland employee, I don't always think the other jurisdiction has the same perspective on how employees are treated. So I do want us to take communication, engagement, and work with our employees, as they're going to be hearing this very seriously. And I would like for us to create as much space as we can for those employees to have influence over this process and how things are termed, named, and communicated.
Excellent. I really appreciate that.
This is a lot of people's jobs.
Yeah. And I know there are a lot of employees listening right now or will be watching this recording later. And I know they're grateful to hear you call that out. And we are doing everything we can to communicate with them, make sure that they're informed, answer their questions as soon as we are able to. This transition is going to have uncertainty, and it is going to be uncomfortable, and we can't avoid that. But I think by providing information and providing a listening ear that then also can help with some of that anxiety, bring that down a little bit. Like, that's the best support we can give right now to our employees. And I think also that the other thing that I say a lot to the staff is that something has to change. If we don't move through this transition and through this period of anxiety, it's not like it's going to stay fine, that we're in an okay status quo. We're not. We have to move through this. It's actually going to land us in a better place. It's just going to be hard as we're moving through it.
And if I could add on to that, for staff as well, transfers of public employees to another public employee entity are governed by state statute. So there are protections built into the law for public employees that are making that change. So if we get to that point where that is happening, the process is very prescribed, and it is employee-centered and protective of their rights. Having been through that a couple of times at either seats, I can attest to kind of the rigor of that process. So.
Okay. Well, Rachel, Craig, I want to, if there's any other questions or comments from counselors, I want to thank you for your just pinpoint laser focus on just getting this big behemoth here and moving it forward. I hope today was enough guidance for you to move forward. I think council laid it out clearly. I think there's also some extra steps there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. COO Communications.
Thank you, Deputy President. Can everybody hear me okay? So we are monitoring the situation at our sites today in light of the heat advisory that starts at noon today and goes through 10 p.m. tomorrow. Today's temperature is expected to peak between 90 and 100 degrees, and then tomorrow's is expected to be in the upper 90s. But importantly, temps overnight will likely not drop by very much. So we won't have what we had last night, which was that nice cool breeze kind of taking things down. So please check in on your loved ones that don't have air conditioning, and make sure that especially vulnerable folks have access to cooling if you have those relationships. We're not at this point expecting any closures or shortened business hours, but if we end up in that space, we will absolutely let you know. On a related note, as you know, Metro is close to finalizing a regional study on cooling corridors. The study is intended to identify potential strategies to mitigate urban heat islands and reduce the impacts of the increasing number and intensity of extreme heat events. I met with the work group this morning, very timely, to discuss the project and the proposed timeline. Right now, the project team is gathering information from experts and community-based organizations to identify target areas, potential strategies, and opportunities for collaboration. We hope to return to council and our partners in the fall with the analysis, findings, and recommendations based on the information that we're gathering right now. I want to call out how special and meaningful this work feels and how impressed I am with the team that has brought heart and creativity and strong science together to bring clarity and frankly hope to the topic of heat. I got to see the sort of draft conclusions and recommendations today. I'm just so excited for you to hear from them in September, because you'll see that through their work and analysis, a more resilient region, resilient to heat, is not only possible, it is within reach. And they have really zeroed in on how we can have the strongest impact at a regional level. So I'm just so excited about that work, and it feels just so important at the start of a heat wave, the start of our heat season. Lastly, just want to shout out to folks to be extra gentle with our finance staff as they navigate the end of the fiscal year and all of the related processes that come with it. Today, July 15th, Metro is going to certify our 2025-26 adopted budget with all 3 counties, including the associated property tax levies. The final adopted budget book will be available on August 15th. And then finance staff are also just beginning, closing out the last fiscal year in preparation for the annual external financial audit. Metro's external auditors completed their interim fieldwork in May and will conclude the rest of their testing this fall. And then you'll hear the results of that testing when council receives the annual comprehensive financial report in December. So that's it. Thank you.
All right. Council communications. Council Rosenthal and then Council Lewis.
One thing, well, the two things. First of all, the Tualatin had its Viva Tualatin. Metro sponsored the main stage, the music stage. It was a nice but fairly hot event, well attended and sort of fun and good music. Second one is the Washington County Coordinating Committee had its meeting yesterday, and probably the only thing of great interest, there was an update on some of the things, the future vision and on SHS and so forth. But one of the interesting things is the short time frame for the high speed or high capacity rail study that the legislature supported in this latest session, which is now, I believe it has a deadline of the end of this year, which is going to be a lot of work for identifying any potential capacity for using the existing freight rail lines or abandoned lines for high capacity transit in this area. So that's something that's moving forward, and that was presented. And then just on a note, the recent studies have indicated that heat islands are served best by mixture of deciduous and coniferous trees.
All right, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, I wanted to report back on the last meeting of the Tri-County Planning Body. We actually met last Wednesday. But I think on Thursday I was head in a phone, so didn't speak up about this. But the Tri-County Planning Body last week approved the technical assistance and training implementation strategies. And those are actually, training and technical assistance are two different strategies with two different funding plans at the county level. And we also had a discussion about employee recruitment and retention implementation. And that decision will be later in the fall, September or October. So those kind of last three items that haven't yet been brought over to implementation and funding are well underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, July 17th, 2025 at 10:30 a.m. The meeting will be held virtually.